turned out to be one of the better deers I've ever killed. Really
How big was it?
It was at 8 point, about 19 inches wide.
Okay.
Pretty heavy rack there. So
okay.
He was only about 180 pounds. Wasn't the biggest body deer.
Does your family like venison?
Oh, they love it. They love it. All my wife and 3 kids all.
Ever have anybody, family or friends, that go, ooh?
All the time. Yeah, a lot of people just don't. They don't know. That's right.
I tell them one of our favorite ways to fix it is the steaks and chicken fried. Batter,
that's right.
Cream gravy, mashed potatoes, you cover that up. You're not going to tell me that's not beef.
That's right. Well, and it's crazy because I figured out a lot of wild game can be tough, and we'll cue a rabbit or wild turkey. My children love it, and you should see some of the teachers' expression when, well, what are you eating today? Rabbit? My kids and my little girls have a rabbit at school. So yeah.
Yeah, at the end of last deer season, went with a guy and we got one, and all the processors weren't open when we needed them to be, and so we didn't go to our regular processor. He took it to somebody that was open. And I usually have most of mine staked out with some ground, other kind of stuff. So I said, well, just have them stake it out. Well, they did it different than any I'd ever seen. They actually took bone and all, just steaks with a bone.
Wow.
Just like that. And I thought, well, I'll make jerky out of it and I'll cut thin strips, but that's been in the freezer. My wife's been pulling those out, put those on the grill, and they're great.
Like a ham, just cut.
Yeah, just like that. And it's tender without tenderizing. They're not real thick, but as a matter of fact, that's what we had last night.
How about that?
I'm ready for the next deer season. We're going to run out of the venison in our freezer.
I'm always glad to hear about a new process, so we might have to try that.
Yeah. And if you get your quota next year and you need somebody to come help thin the herd,
you'll be glad to come.
Yeah, I'll be glad to minister to you in that way if I can.
I understand. The harder part is now when your kids start hunting, you don't get to kill as many deer because
that's true. That's true.
Right. So we get our freezer full. I might have to give you a call.
Okay. That works. Or I don't mind if you want to kill some extra ones, just let me come get the meat. I can do that too.
Okay.
That's better than fishing. Have somebody just bring the fish
that's
cleaned
right.
and ready. Yeah. Well, I'm with Joshua today, and I was referred to him by a friend when I asked the question about pastors that have successfully led in change and growth in small churches. And he is in rural South Carolina out of Johnson. I'd never been there before till today when we went there for lunch, and we've been having a chance to get acquainted, to share kingdom stories about life and what's going on. And so it's my privilege to interview him today as a part of this journey. So, Joshua, first...
Josh is fine.
Josh, okay, yeah. I was wondering.
Yeah.
Joshua's what your mom called you when you were in trouble?
And it's what my mom still calls me. I named you Joshua, she says. That's your name, but...
Okay, I don't assume anything.
Yeah,
okay?
Josh
it's like I'm James. I've never been Jim to anybody, unless it's G-E-M, and nobody's ever accused me of that. Tell us about your upbringing. Where'd you grow up? Your family life growing up?
Yeah.
Where are you from?
So I grew up in a small town in Georgia, Locust Grove, Georgia. I say small town. It was when I grew up, much like the town I live and serve in now. And I grew up at Philippi Baptist Church in Locust Grove, Georgia, and now I pastor Philippi Baptist Church in Johnston, South Carolina. But I grew up there, and great childhood. By God's grace, both my parents weren't always in church. They divorced when I was like first grade, but one of them was always there, and I was always kind of connected through one of them to the church, and so that's where I grew up and had that experience there. Was saved about the age of 12, and then about 4.
What was the circumstance around your commitment of faith?
Well, at 6. Soon around the time my dad had come to Christ, he began to share with us very purposefully, and I went before the church and was baptized, but really didn't understand what was going on. At 12, I was in a youth meeting in the basement of the parsonage where the youth group was meeting at that time, and just fell under conviction that I really was not a believer, and had not surrendered my life to Christ. And I've remembered many times leaning my head on the back of that the row in front of me of metal chairs and surrendering that day to Christ. And so that was when that took place. And then about 2 years later, we called a new youth minister to the church, and he gave this invitation of, hey, if anybody would like to be discipled, if you want to know what that is, if you'd like to be discipled, let me know. And it piqued my interest, and I went into his home for the next 2.5 years. We met every week, and he poured into me. Me and one of my really close friends. And so that was really a huge growth process for me in there. Out of that, at the age of 15, I began to question about a call to ministry. Shared that with him. He prayed with me through that, never pushed me. It was about a year later that we were at summer camp, and we had a sermon, and then we had kind of a response time afterwards where our youth leader challenged us to kind of go out and spend some personal time in prayer. And it was there. We were on the campus of the University of North Florida there in Jacksonville, and it was there that I surrendered the call of ministry.
Now, evidently, you grew up, you stayed in the same area, went to just one school system from 1st to 12th grade.
Correct. One church, everything.
Did you have friends that made commitments of faith at a young age, but when they became adolescents, they drifted away from that?
Of course.
Okay. How do you account for the fact that that didn't happen to you?
The discipleship process was the really connection point for me there. And there were some youth group and maybe later high school that they, much like you described, drifted away, go to college, and that's a classic thing we see so many times. But for me, I think kind of that whole discipleship process was very instrumental in kind of reeling me in and getting me grounded. And it was a great experience. Not that we were perfect, and there was we could go back and identify a lot of things that weren't done well, but we were taught to share our faith. We were valued missions. It was somewhere around 30 kids that we led to Christ. Our youth group led to Christ in the time that youth minister was there.
And how big was that church that you were part of?
It was a small country church. They maybe 125.
Okay.
I'm guessing.
Yeah. So from your time of surrendering to ministry, was it clear to you what that area of ministry was, or was it just a general surrender?
I've always had this call to preach and pastor. I think, when you're young, everybody expects you to do youth ministry. The older I got, and I worked through camps and things through college, the same camp that I was going to as a kid, but really got to a point where I realized in college that I didn't want to go and do youth ministry because I just felt this draw to the pastorate. And I'm not saying it's wrong or right, but I felt a little bit of a burden, like sometimes youth ministry was a stepping stone for people. And sometimes I guess it is, it's a transition, but I never really was called there. And that was hard because being young, that's where everybody wants to push you, and so that was.
How much did your sense of call to ministry influence where you went to college?
Not much at all. It influenced that I went to college. So,
okay.
I grew up on a farm, worked with my hands. That's really what I'm good at. If I wasn't a pastor, I'd be a laborer.
You baled any hay in your life?
A little. And so I had no intention of going to college. Even through high school, wrestled with that, and being called answering the call at 16. I'm still in the high school, but I still stayed on my vocational track. I didn't get a college prep diploma. I had 16 hours of auto shop when I graduated. You know, I mean, that's how I was wired. That's my family. That's, you know, it's what I was good at. And my best friend, the guy that I was in discipleship with, he was 2 years older than me. And we had been discipled together there for a good while. And he had gone ahead of me to a Georgia Baptist college. It was a 2-year school. He's 2 years ahead of me. I'm thinking, there's no way, you know. And I'd been up to visit him before. And I remember I prayed the prayer, Lord, it would be awesome and an affirmation if you know, if I could go to college with Daniel, I'd really. And then the phone rings, and he says, hey, I've got to be here one more semester. Why don't you come up here next year and you could be my roommate? And that was one of a long story of the way that the Lord just laid things out.
So what did you major in college?
Christian ministry.
Okay.
So that was at the 2 year, my associate's degree, and then I transferred to another school that was a 4-year school, Baptist school, shorter college, and got a Bachelor of Science in Christian ministry.
Okay. And you did go off to seminary. Did you do that immediately after graduating from college, or was there a lapse in there?
Yeah, so what happened is met my wife my senior year of college. We came back home. She got a teaching job in our hometown, and I was going to take a year and work. I went right back to a place I'd worked through college, working on lawnmowers, and we were there, and our intention was to get married and move off and go to seminary. And we visited a church that I had been a youth intern at during college, and the pastor asked me out to lunch and said, hey, what are you doing? And I said, well, we're going to get married, go to seminary. He said, well, why don't you stay here? We just bought some property with a house on it. You live in the house, go to seminary at the campus here in Atlanta, and be on staff here at the church. My wife was able to keep her same teaching job.
Was this one of those occasions where you told your wife that to go pack while you prayed?
No, I mean, it was a little bit of a question there. It was neat how it worked out because of that. I mean, and we really lived off her salary. They gave us a house, and I think they paid for my school, and I think I made $80 a month was my money. But I mean, they paid all of our utilities and everything at the house. It was a huge blessing, and I got to be mentored by that staff at that church, and so it was a.
So what year did you leave seminary?
That was 2007.
2007. Okay.
So I stayed at that church for 2 years. They were building a new school in my hometown, which was, 8 miles away. Locust Grove, the church we were at was in McDonough, Georgia. And we had some connection through my wife's teaching job with the people who were going to be kind of leading in this new Christian school that we heard about. And we went to visit. It was her principal was going to be one of the head of schools there. And we went to visit. Her principal's mother was having surgery. I said, let's go to the hospital and pray with her and be with her. And we were sitting here talking, and they asked my wife to be the music teacher, come to that school. And I said, well, what are your qualifications going to be for your Bible teacher? And she looked and said, well, what would you like for them to be? And I was like, whoa, I don't have any intention on teaching. But the Lord worked through that, and we both ended up going to work for that school, and we're there for 3 years. It was a really great experience, an amazing school. I mean, it was not like your typical start. I mean, we walked into a $40 million facility day one.
Yeah.
We became fully SACS accredited within the first year. It was a really neat experience, and yet there was still a burning and drawing me to pastor. So in the third year, my wife got pregnant, decided she wanted to stay home. She made more money than I did because she had more education to be a teacher. And so we were like, how are we going to do this? And I just still had this stirring, so I began to look for a church, and that's what ultimately kind of moved us this direction.
Okay. So you went from there to here?
I went from teaching to here, and I I sent my resume in response to an ad in the South Carolina Baptist paper, which they actually laugh about here because it was like, are we wasting our money putting an ad in the Courier? And but there were a lot of them. I didn't send my resume everywhere to everybody. I just felt a draw here, something about it. I remember looking it up on Google Maps, and it was just like, I told my wife, I'm like, I don't know what it is about this church in South Carolina. I said, there's just something that seems like a draw there. And the day my son was born, the chairman of the search committee called me in the hospital. I walked out of the room to take the phone call. And like I said, we really didn't, I thought I was going to have to get a night job for us to be able to live. And we came and visited, then came back and preached that summer. And next month, that'll be 12 years ago.
The church experience that you grew up with, both in your home church and then the churches you were involved in after that, how would you describe those churches? Would you call those traditional? Would you call those some other hybrid variation? Okay,
so a little bit of everything. So I grew up in a traditional Southern Baptist church, but not. It was almost in some ways kind of a mixed, a little more independent leaning. Mm-hmm. And it transitioned throughout my lifetime from that somewhat. And then my grandparents on my father's side were in the Independent Baptist Church, and so I went to church with them in Bible school and was around that. And then I did through college at the church I ended up being on staff at, and then one other. Both were larger churches, large staff. One was multi-site. So a totally different experience from what I grew up in. Salem, where I was at, had quite a large staff, 3 services on Sunday morning, 2 Sunday schools, traditional, contemporary, and blended. So you had a full gamut there of everything. And so that was a great experience for me, though, because I got to see a lot of different things. You had staff that instead of one pastor having to do it all, you had staff doing all different kind of specifics, multiple youth ministers. We all took different days to go to the hospital. I mean, it was just a completely different experience from where I'm at now. And it was a good experience. I learned a lot there, and they were gracious and patient with me and gave me the opportunity to preach, which I was always thankful for.
Were there, when you came here, either prior to or since you've been here, were there any primary influences in terms of people you read or you heard or you listened to that's helped sort of shape your thinking about ministry?
There were a couple of guys that through probably the book I've probably gone back to the most is a book that we read on servant leadership. I think it was called Upside Down. And it really had some, I remember a lot of conversation in a pastoral ministry class about servant leadership, but about the transition of being the preacher to the pastor to my pastor, and that taken 3 to 5 years even. And so that was something I really thought through and applied coming into this situation. The other thing that probably shaped me as much as anything I read is when I was on staff at that first church, the senior pastor and then one of the assistants he had been there for years, they loved pastoral care ministry and valued being with people. That assistant pastor, I mean, the first day I went to visit hospitals with him, we were there for a brain surgery, and we were at the hospital for like 18 hours that day. It was a long day. But as I walked through doing that, even being a 25-year-old guy, I met people within that church that like we had long relationship even until now, because I was there with them through some very difficult moments. And walking in blind, they didn't know me and I didn't know them, but we got to know each other sitting in a waiting room, and then we cried together and laughed together and all of those things. That was huge for me in understanding the value of those things and loving and leading people.
Yeah. So when you landed here, what year was that?
2010.
2010. Was there a particular account in Scripture or a particular verse, a set of verses that you would say has sort of framed your philosophy, your thinking about ministry and your purpose here and the purpose of the church and the kingdom?
Yeah. Definitely when you think about the Great Commission, but one of my favorite chapters of Scripture is 2 Corinthians chapter 5. And just that picture there of the new creation, what Christ has done for us, and what He's called us to in making reproducing disciples. So from my senior year in college, I fell in love with 2 Corinthians 5:14 on, and just like I'd preach it when I'd get an opportunity, and well, then even in coming here, about 3 years after I was here, I was introduced to a friend who's become one of my friends and mentors in life. He was a missionary that was home for a while, and he began to disciple me here. And the kind of whole anchor when we first met was 2 Corinthians 5:16 and 17. And I was just like, wow. And so it was just the Lord affirming those things. But yeah, discipleship, going back to my 14-year-old experience, pouring into people, passing that along, has been kind of a connection point there.
So the church that you discovered here when you finally came on site, became the lead pastor here, age 25.
I was 30.
30. Oh, age 30. All right. So what did you discover this church really was like? I mean, what were their practices, their habits, their traditions, their patterns? What was life like around here that you inherited in that position?
So it seemed to be, and they told me this, but I didn't know what to believe, coming in, because it seems like many times the churches want to sell you on themselves, and I get it, but they told me we really don't have a whole lot of contention or strife, and they were right. And so I found a lot of young families that were here, a lot of young men that wanted to lead and were engaged in the life of the church, which I'd been into other churches and it didn't look that way. I found a group of deacons that had been trained through past experience to care for and honor and protect the pastor, which was awesome. And people that loved missions, that had come to an understanding of giving towards missions. And so those things all were like really great things to kind of set up success. I feel like they were ready to be led and to move forward. And so that was kind of the situation that we walked into.
Well, given the fact that for the last 30 years, that's sort of a window, that expressions of worship have been one of the primary areas of debate and or contentions in churches. What's right, what needs to be done, what should be done, why should you do it? What was it you encountered here, and what was your take on what needed to be done in terms of anything to further the cause of the purpose of the church?
Right. Well, it's interesting, we're in a building in the middle of a rural setting that was built in 1896. So a lot of history, a lot of tradition, but when I came in, they already had a screen and weren't holding hymnals. And that was a big tell. Now, we were still singing a lot of hymns, which was fine, but we had a guy here that was leading worship that was playing the piano that was the best anywhere around, and a great choir, and we've had that. That's been a thing here. And those are all things that I'm fine with. I don't feel like we've got to go in, throw all that out, and have a band and that whole deal. It's whatever you do it well. And understand your context. And the people loved it. Even young families, to have that many young families, and people wanted to be a part of that. Young people wanted to sing in the choir and be a part of that. And so that worked well. And so the things that I could see we needed to maybe do better is the theological connection within worship. So not only singing songs that sounded good and we do it well, but allowing worship to be a response to Scripture. And so that's something we do more of now. Of our call to worship might not be a choir special, but instead it might be, and most of the time it's just Scripture. Hey, let's hear Scripture and respond to that with our singing, with our hearing, with our response to preaching. And so that piece has probably been the most change that we've had. Now, the church has always been welcoming to new songs and introducing new stuff, but we really haven't changed the style a whole lot. And it's okay in our context, and we still are a young church for the most part. So.
From 2010 until we all met COVID, what were your numbers like when you came here, and what did you experience and see happen over that span of time until COVID came?
Yeah. So I'm going to give you approximations because I'm not a numbers guy for the biggest part. We have better Sunday school numbers, but I don't want to count heads every Sunday and stress over that. I can kind of look and see if we're full or we're not full, you know. But I know when I came, they were probably running 75 or 70 to 80 in Sunday school, maybe. And then probably around 100 in worship, maybe a little more. Because I remember through the following years, we got up to where we're hitting 100 in Sunday school pretty regular. Like, man, this is awesome. We don't know when we've done that. And we got to a place where we were pretty regular, about 120. Sometimes 100, we've touched 130 in Sunday school. And so that's pretty good in growth there. Now, like I said, that was pre-COVID. Worship, we went from 100 to a place where there was a pretty steady roll there where we were 170, 180 in worship. And that's full in here. And even since COVID, we've had a few Sundays this year where we were 170 plus in here, and it was full. It was like, we don't know where we're going to put them. And right before COVID, we were looking at moving some walls out and all that, March 2020, slamming the brakes on all that. But that's been a struggle for us because we've been at that 80% place for over 5 years, and kind of keep beating our head on that wall.
Well, you do understand from the church growth people, they say that you're never going to exceed that consistently because that's like the capacity people have for
that's right.
how intimate they want to be.
And that's why we were saying we've got to do something. Yeah. We were thinking to move out. We got some Sunday school classes here on the side of the sanctuary. Was kind of an incremental step before another building or another service, which might get us to more people that would enable us to do that type of thing.
Yeah. Well, now that pattern of growth that you saw during that time, was that reflective of your understanding of what historically the church had done or been, or had this church been, if you've gone back and looked at the records, the annual reports, had it been pretty steady over time, not moving one way or the other, or had there been seasons of up and down and up and down?
Yeah, I think it had been pretty steady. It had been a long time since they had seen growth like that. I mean, from what I would hear people say, even when we look at Sunday school numbers, talking about, man, we can't remember when it's been a long time since we broke 100 in Sunday school.
Right. And given the fact that there's a penchant culturally, this isn't just in the church, but culturally, to try to find some equation or formula that you've stumbled on that explains how you went from point A to point B and that kind of thing. If you were to articulate what you think accounted for that effectiveness in reaching people and growth, what would you say that was?
I think it is maybe a couple of things. One is just steady preaching the word. I think people are hungry for good theology and and to be fed. And I'm a little bit long-winded in that area sometimes, especially when you get to handle something heavy and people are like, oh, well, they're not going to come and they're not going to sit there. But they do, you know. I'm not a 20-minute guy. And but I've been here for 12 years, and we've been very purposeful in our community. It's been a huge thing. School partnerships, just trying to serve. We've tried a lot and failed at it, and been willing to do that and try to fail forward in this outreach, or this, you know, backyard Bible club, or Easter deal, or Easter egg hunt, or, you know, baseball camp. Or, I mean, we've done tons of stuff and had some good success with it, and failed at some of it. But for sure, if you removed Philippi Baptist Church from this community, there would be a void. And that's something that we've tried to create. Even though we're not the church in town, you've got to drive 5 miles out into the peach orchard to get out here. But there's an understanding, I feel like, within our community of who we are and the way that we love and serve.
Do you know, are you aware of, in looking at Google Earth or a Google map, at the scope of your ministry now as opposed to when you first came here, as to where people are coming from to be a part of the Sunday experience here and then everything else?
Yeah. I don't know that I would say that has grown.
Okay.
That's probably pretty close to the same. It maybe has grown, but just reaching more people within our area, and trying to make that connection there. I would say everybody, for the most part, is within a 10 to 15 mile. 15 mile would be a long one, but radius. Now, there are a few outliers. We've had some people from Aiken that have come. That's been quite a journey. We've got a family that's been here and has moved to Aiken, and they still come back. You know, and so you've got, and that's, you know, getting on to more like 25 miles.
Okay. Now, what county are you in here?
We're right on the edge of Edgefield County.
Right on the edge of Edgefield
close
County.
to Aiken County, close to Saluda County. They all kind of come together here.
Would you say the demographic of this area is pretty static? Or are you close to a high growth zone, or is this a pretty static environment?
Very static. Now, recently, as it is all over the South, there's some people moving in here. There's not a lot of new homes being built, but homes that are here, you got a good many people moving from the Northeast and from California. You're like, how did you find Johnston, South Carolina? But not a lot of new homes being built here. Now, when you get to the south end of our county, there's a lot of growth from the Augusta area in there, but here I would say it's very static. If not almost in decline, you know, a lot of people that grow up here might move away. So that's been a little bit of a challenge in thinking about building a building or taking on debt. Just looking at that, you know, I mean, being realistic about.
In terms of the disposition or the temperament of the home folks here,
okay,
that this is home for them, how have they responded to new people coming in, to the space issue of, you know, crowding as opposed to what it used to be like? Are they accepting? Are they excited? Are they cautious? Are they guarded? How would you describe their?
I have not in 12 years had one person complain to me because somebody was in their seat.
Wow. You sure this is a Baptist church?
Yeah. Now, I hear that some of those people might have passed before I came here, but I honestly haven't. As some of the people that they always sat at the same place and they come in, there'd be some guests in their seat, we're kind of excited about it and going, man, there's people. Or I'll hear statements like, I used to know everybody here, now I feel like I don't know anybody. You know, as in know them. Like there's so many new faces in the room. They're like, who's so-and-so, you know, which is great, you know, and it's a process of us getting to know one another more. But yeah, I think that's another huge thing that people were excited about growth. I think sometimes people say they want growth in churches, but they really don't want everything that comes with it. And, you know, as we encountered problems or kids' needs for children's ministry, or they're loud in church or whatever, I always just say, hey, we could get in the car and I could ride you to plenty of churches that wish they had this problem because they have no children and they aren't experiencing those things. And so this is a blessing, not a problem. It's just we got to figure out how to navigate
Would you
it.
say that public communication, preaching is your strong suit in terms of all your spiritual gift mixes?
Yes. I would say preaching, teaching, and then encouragement and just relationships, conversation. That's a place where I like to connect with people.
Are you an expositor? Are you a storyteller? How would you describe your communication style?
Yeah, I'm a bit of a mix. I like to preach through or teach through. On Wednesday night, we teach more and really enjoy that time. I'm not as much of a storyteller, but I do like to preach through. But I don't always. I try to keep my thumb on the congregation, and I think you can get wrapped up in just preaching through books and miss if your church is going through something. Right. And so I try to get that feel and connection and kind of alternate back and forth through that. And so it's a little bit of a mixture for me.
Okay. In looking back in the time you've been here, what would you do differently if you had it to do over again?
Whew. I don't think you got enough battery.
Pick one or two.
Yeah. What would I do differently? I wasn't prepared for that question. I think probably the most recent example, which is probably the easiest to go to for most people, is I probably would have handled COVID a lot differently.
Okay. Translate that for us.
I feel like some guys did this really well. I did not. I'm such a relational person of one-on-one conversations. I'm not a technology guy at all. And so I didn't do well with connecting with my people.
Okay.
When we disconnected, we disconnected. Yeah. And man, if I look back and feel like I stunk it up on that one. I wish I could go back. And then, we, in all areas of how we navigated COVID in the unknown, looking back now, it's very easy to say with service or with meeting or with guidelines, we would have done it we should have done it this way, and we did it this way. I don't think those things were as big a hindrances as the first thing I mentioned.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, out of all your options in terms of addressing your growth issues, the challenge of space and managing those, is there a particular reason or reasons why multiplying services was not one or two on your option list?
There is. We're at a place where trying to find, with lots of family nursery workers and child care, when I multiply services, I'm multiplying volunteers at every level. And that was the probably biggest challenge that we were facing at trying to make that happen. And then you've got trying to reproduce the same thing 2 times. Is everybody going to sing in the choir twice? Or are you going to not have a choir at one and have a choir at the other?
Pardon my laughing. These are all familiar subject matters for some of us.
So that was the challenge where we were at. It just, we didn't have an abundance of people to do those things, where some churches do. They might have enough for 2 whole worship teams, and that just wasn't an easy answer for us. And even now we're in between accompanists. So we've got a lady who plays piano for us who had been retired from playing the piano and is glad to do it for a while, but we understand it's short term and she only does it 2 Sundays a month. And another guy plays guitar 2 Sundays a month. And we're getting through it. We're doing the best we can, but it's going to be an issue that we've got to address. And I think it's something in a lot of rural churches, because there used to be more people that learned to play the piano. And so that the generation of those people who have that skill set, there's just a lot less of them and a lot greater need. And so trying to navigate what that looks like might change our style somewhat out of necessity, not out of desire.
So out of all the things you've mentioned in terms of contextual challenges, what is your biggest challenge right now?
Right now, our biggest challenge is overcoming the big pause of COVID. And in some ways, I feel like I'm restarting a 200-year-old church, 208-year-old church. We moved back into survival mode, where to accomplish a Sunday morning worship service was what we were trying to make happen. People got accustomed to not being a part of committees or teaching or serving or here or there. And restarting all of those things is what we're in the middle of right now, I feel like, in this summer. We're trying to come back really strong this fall. And that's been our biggest challenge right now.
Now, a lot of churches of all sizes, and even some larger churches, same thing happened to them. They scaled back to just a single thing. But when they restarted, they realized that they had needed to do some reorganization for a long time, and those would have been wars fought over turf and personality, those kind of things. And when they came back, they decided just to let some things go and not restart those. Or is that a part of your thinking process now? What is vital? What is important? What do we just need to let fade into the background?
And you know, that's something that's been good, though, I'll say, throughout. The church has been willing to follow and respond to, hey, is this effective or is it not? I told you about our missions where we would try things, but also like, what are we doing Wednesday night? What are we doing on Sunday night? Why are we doing it? Is it effective? Is it the best use of our time? Like, we quit doing Sunday nights about a year after I came. When I came, that was a clear expectation. No, we were gonna have Sunday morning service, Sunday night service, and Wednesday night. And we started noticing Sunday night was looking like about 8 people showing up. And we're trying to have teachers for classes with 1 or 2 kids because people just aren't coming back. And the same teachers teaching Sunday night are the ones that taught Sunday morning and Wednesday night. And so they're willing to hear that. And instead, we started doing different things on Sunday night. And we've done, you know, a few different things in that time slot. And they've been okay with that, you know. I don't feel like it was as heavy as it could have been or probably was in a lot of other churches because we've had a pretty healthy mentality with that throughout. There may be some things that we'll never bring back. We changed our service time coming out of that because meeting outside, we would meet way earlier and kind of liked it. And now that's been a little bit of a question now. We're actually about to try to handle that with a survey and let the people speak and go from there. But you know, that's been an interesting one for me because I can't put my finger on exactly why everybody's where they're at on what time preference is, you know. And there's logic and reasoning in all their arguments, but for me, I enjoy getting out an hour earlier. And 9 a.m. Sunday school doesn't seem that early to me.
So if it's a toss-up, are you prepared to make an executive decision?
I won't make it myself. I think I always would make that with my deacons because we function as...
Well, let me reframe that. Are you prepared to take the lead in that executive decision?
I would, but it's not a hill I want to die on either. You know? I mean, if we're gathering, that's my goal. You know, and so I want to gather the most people that we can, you know, and try to move them in that direction. If I felt like it was something that was going to change ministry, but I'm not dying on that hill.
All right, as we're winding this time down, I want you to speak to 2 categories. One is I'd like for you to look at, you know, pick that camera or this camera, maybe this one over here, and if there's a young pastor that is in a church similar to this and they're new to that or they're considering that or they're struggling with how to move the ball, advance it down the field, what would you say to them in terms of what they need to think about and focus on and really pray about?
I'll say, first of all, think about the people and pray and ask the Lord to endear your heart to those people. Even if they're some difficult people, like if the Lord has called you there, rest in that calling and ask Him to cause you to love those people, and then set out living out that love. 1 John 3:18 says, let us not love with word or tongue, but with action and in truth. And let them see that, because that's what's going to lead you to a place where some difficult people will follow you when they know you love them. And that's going to give you some leverage to be able to lead them to some hard places. I think sometimes we're not willing to put the time in to go through some really challenging moments to get to a place where the people do know that we love them and they love us, and then they'll follow us, and it does take some time. And so stay the course there, and seeking to love and lead those people, and be patient in that process.
And if you were to speak to a church, rural church, that's without a pastor, and they look at the resumes and they put the word out and they're struggling with their future and they're like on their last leg kind of thing, what would you say to that church in terms of what they need to focus on and what they need to be willing to consider and accept as part of God's will?
Yeah. I would encourage this, and this is something that I struggle with. I would encourage that you look for God's man. We can get caught up on experience, we can get caught up on education, and we can miss out on what God is wanting to do. And somebody's got to take a chance on a young man that feels a burden and a calling, but hasn't had the opportunity to walk in obedience yet. And Philippi took a chance on me. I had not been a senior pastor anywhere. I hadn't finished my master's degree, and I still haven't. And they took a chance on me through much prayer, and it has been not my doing, but it's been the Lord's blessing on my life and ministry and on this church, that He's used us for His glory and His kingdom. And so be willing to look past some of the standards that you're not going to find in Scripture, and rest on the ones that you do find in Scripture, and be careful about that.
Okay, I just thought of one more question.
Sure, go for it.
And that is, for those who may be listening to this or watching this down the road, and they were to pray for you in this church, what is it you would want them to pray for?
I would want them to pray that we would be able to have an eternal mindset, because I think for us in our church, as much as across our nation, we can get so bound up culturally in what Christianity is, and we end up doing the bare minimum. We don't understand sacrifice. We don't understand Peter's call for us to live as aliens and strangers here, and we really miss out on how much God can do in and through us. And so pray that our church might not get bound up in that, but instead that we could really lay aside some of the things that can entangle us, that might even look normal, like the American dream, like our plans and purposes on life, or having certain things or doing certain things, but instead that there might be a real, genuine, deep burden for the gospel, for people who are far off being brought near. And I think at the end of the day, if we could do that, and we see not just a minister sharing the gospel, but when we get the congregation living out and sharing the gospel and then making disciples, that's success.
Okay.
And success that we can't print in the paper, because it's not numbers. It's that's the real thing. So thank you for that question.
Well, thanks for your time. Thanks for sharing lunch with me today, and showing me around. Yeah, well, and showing me where you shot that deer and that, I guess, that turkey too.
Yeah.
Find Josh.